the second section, and welcome to Linus Napoleonic Shipyard. This is the HMS Sophie build, and we are going to be talking about painting the model. So if you haven't watched the first section, go back and maybe watch that one first, where I talk about building the masts and also prepping the sea base and so on. So painting, what I do with my models is I first do the deck. And at least on British ships, this tends to be really light. They were wholly installing these decks and keeping them pretty clean on a warship. So I'll go in with a really light deck tan, probably mixing some white in there, also mixing some thinner, like acrylic thinner, in there to make it flow into the recesses and so on. Make sure you don't get a too thick layer, especially if the models are like a fine model, then you don't want to cover the detail like the planks and so on. You want that showing. So that's what I'm doing here on the Sophie. I'm just painting in the deck with a layer of deck tan mixed with some white. I'll vary this mixture. I'm not going to give you like a specific mixture, but a good deck tan paint and then some white, and maybe you can just make it a little warmer or a little colder. So here I'm started working, and you can see this is the double layer silk span, and I'm working on the sail. I'm just measuring on the masts to make the sails look alright. So that's the way. So there it's the way you see how I do it. And then I'm gonna be filling it in. A lot of this is gonna disappear because it's pencil, but then I am using a gray fine liner, a marker pen, to draw in some of those panels on the sails and so on to make them permanent. You're always working in parallel. Soft tone, really good from Army Painter. That's what I usually use on my decks to get that contrast between the planks, and also, you know, just basically getting some depth in that section of the hull. It does get a little darker, a little warmer, and then sometimes I'd go over with a dry brush or just a thin brush just to lift some areas again with some of that deck tan and so on, just to get a lighter tone on the. And then on the Sophie, I decided to have the mast there were like going to be not like normal Royal Navy, this baby puke or yellow color, but a more brown. And here I'm like experimenting a little bit different browns, using some more like ochre and so on in there until I get a tone on the mast that I kind of like. So, and this is also based on, I'm looking at paintings. So I'm looking a lot of paintings by Antoine Roy lately, because I find his paintings pretty good. And he's an era painter. So I was actually looking at the Roy painting and trying to match the color of the masts to his painting. Is it correct? Don't know, but it kind of looked good. It contrasted a little bit with the other colors that I was going to use, as Sophie doesn't have this standard baby puke either for the hull. For most parts, she has like a wider white stripe, right, in the book. So I'm going for this grayish white stripe, and then I wanted something contrasting with that, with this paint. I don't use a wet palette, and I do mix and match paints, also speed paints. I do like speed paints because they have this two-tone, they give the contrast straight away. And see here I'm using like a painting, modern painting, just for reference for some stuff and so on. So usually having the phone close by, cell phone, and then using references on there is always handy. I tend to do most of this stuff in one sitting as I'm doing one thing on the hull. Like right now I'm working on the browns, so I'll go the shading and the highlight and everything when the paint is still a little bit wet. So I'm kind of blending, wet blending stuff into each other. And here's the first layer for the stripe there on the hull, or the streak, and it's a mix between, there's a little bit of gray, black in there, in this off-white, is to get a base tone. And you see, I don't mask things and so on. Things are really small, so I feel masking is even kind of hard at this scale. So just trusting my hand to do a good job of drawing the lines even. If something is not right, I just go over it with the other paint. I mean, it's a patient thing, you know. So when I do the black, maybe I paint over some with white, and then I already highlighted the white, but so I'm gonna have to go over again. But the process for me, at least it works, right? So, but I also do the strake or the band there, the gun port band. I do that first. Most ships I paint, I end up doing the strake before I do anything else. And why I do that first is because you tend to paint over other stuff a little bit when you do. It's just I did it the other way around earlier, and I found it harder to paint that on after. I don't know why. It's just a preference, I guess. Harder to see. And so here I'm doing some of the deck details, and that's a mix between two different speed paints, like this hardened leather and this pale bone, I think it's called. It's just to get some more contrast in there. I'm also using this on the masts to get some contrast under the rings and so on. Also on the wood details on the deck. And so we're back to the white, and now we're doing a little bit of more like a highlight, and then I'm gonna do some shading using some gray wash, and then more highlights. So you just build it up. I don't go exactly the same every time. I do once, sometimes I do a little bit lighter, sometimes I do a little darker, but I just find variations really good. So this is the gray wash, and usually what I do, if I'm washing a model, the side of the hull, I'm turning it upside down when I'm washing, because I don't want the wash to collect on the side that it's going to actually be up and where the sun is most likely going to hit, right? I want it on the side that is going to be down. So that's why I turn the hull upside down, because then the wash is going to find those recesses. So that's a good tip, turn the model upside down when you do that. And here I am doing another wash with a little bit, I mix a little bit of speed paint, blue speed paint in there. I'm just trying to get those windows on the stern galleries and the side galleries there. And again, mixing a little bit of pale bone and hardened leather and white for just getting a little bit warmer color on this white strake. I don't want like a bright white strake, because it gets too light, and I want like a little bit of a mix. So of course, maybe you're more comfortable go and paint straight from the bottle, but there is warm whites that you can buy, right? But I always prefer to mix my colors. Also, when I'm trying to get the same-ish color, like this baby puke, I always mix it by hand, so then every ship is slightly different. I mean, I get them pretty close, but there's variations. I feel that's more realistic. Might be wrong. So again, everything takes time, right? Patience, picking out some of these hull details with this hardened leather brown mixed with the pale bone, so it gets like this woody, warm, lightish brown color. Of course, I'm gonna later also go in and highlight this, mixing some white in there in the paint, also in some areas shade it with some wash and so on. This is to get some contrasts going. And also, as you can see, even speed it up. I think you have this at 800%, like you speed it up 8 times. Even with that, things takes time. But it's starting to come together. The hull is starting to look like a hull. Next step is the black, and I always start, every time this I do, I use a speed paint for when I paint in the black, the first layer of the black. Then I'm using other paints after, but for the first layer I'm using Army Painter, this grim dark black speed paint. This is a two-tone, like a contrast paint. so that I get a little bit of contrast on the model already from the beginning. And I also find it's a really nice base layer, so I can do some highlights, or just using a plain acrylic black. I can get some shades in there also on the black, since it's a little bit lighter, grayer black in itself, this one. It lets some of that gray beneath shine through in some areas. So and it also helps me to see where I want to go with my shades and highlights a little bit, because it's like picking out some of the detail already on the base coat. And just mostly I just work this in 1 or 2 sittings. Maybe I do one sitting with just the plain black, and then another sitting with the shades and the highlights. Usually it's a very long step. It takes a long time to paint on the black. Also, you need to be, you want to be very careful with this step, because you don't want to overpaint any of the light areas if you can. Because it's always harder to cover a dark paint than a light paint, right? So always very, very careful at this step, trying to get it just right, so I don't have to repaint anything. I mean, even speed it up, you see this is a long step. It takes quite a bit of time to do. Different angles. Also started to do the yard arms and so on. I decided to have them black, and also the fighting tops were going to be black on this version of HMS Speedy. And also the royal mast on the top there, I decided to have that black as well. So the rest of the mast is this brown color I made, but then the yard arms and the top and the fighting tops are going to be this more standard black, like probably lamp black that they painted them, or maybe they tarred them. But mostly I think at this point they were painting them lamp black. And again, mixing. I'm not going to go into exactly, because this is the way I did it on this hull, and then I'm going to do it some other way on some other hull. But I'm mixing a little bit brown in the white, basically, just to get it a little bit warmer. I wanted a more warm gray white tone for the streak. And also I made it quite wide. Like first I was thinking to have it a little bit thinner, and I think it is a little thinner on many of the paintings of the fictional Sophie, but then I think I read in the book, I heard in the book, so I listened to it, that it was quite a wide strake. So also I just wanted to, I don't use white that often on the ships, so now that I had a chance to use white, I just wanted to spend some time on the white, and then I decided to make the strake quite wide, just to be able to spend the time on it. There's different tones, working the highlights. I mean, I shaded it with that gray wash. Then now I'm like highlighting it, and here we are doing a little bit of the highlighting on the black, and basically that's just the speed paint with some normal off-white. As I'm using Vallejo off-white, I really like that one. So I'm just mixing some off-white into the speed paint. I find that works really well. So it's no longer really speed paint, but the speed paint, I don't know, I kind of like the way it dries compared to just using a normal acrylic black with the white. So there is some speed paint in the highlights as well. Looks quite blue here in the video, but in reality, and also you'll see later in the photos, it doesn't look that blue. But also I dries a little darker than it looks when you paint it, so be aware of that. Just working layer for layer, like thinner and thinner, is really just blending it in there to pick out the areas that are going to be having light shine on them. So, and I usually light these models. I don't do this just light from one side that you could do, like if you have an airbrush and so on. I think that would be if the next diorama I do might be a 1/350 scale diorama, and I'm definitely going to do it on that one. But just for game models, I find this more flat light with not too much shades, like hard shade, is looking better, I think, for the tabletop. So this is how it looks so far, and we are ready to paint in the cannons. And again, using speed paint, enchanted steel, I just actually do, most of the times I just do one coat, because as it is two-tone, I get a little bit of shade and highlight with just one layer. When you're using speed paints, they eat brushes, so be aware of that, keep that in mind. So always make sure that you have like I mean, still need a good brush, but not an too expensive brush when you do this, and clean it really thoroughly with some really good soap after you used it, so then it lasts longer. But if you forgot some speed paint on the brush for too long, then the brush is gone, I can say, because I think it's resin paint, right? The speed paints. So just take it easy. It is easy to spill with painting in each gun here. They're tiny, just a couple of millimeters, so take your time when you're doing this. You don't want to redo it and paint over it, and this gets really easy stuck on like lighter tones and so on. Maybe if you wash it then off immediately, you might get some of this metallic shine on a lighter area beside it. Happened to me quite often. So just take your time, take it easy, build it up. So it's coming together, taking shape. Of course, once you have like most of the areas painted in, so none of the primer is showing, you're also starting to get an idea of how your finished model is going to look. I wasn't really happy with the blues here on those galleries, like the windows, so I went in with a little bit of a darker blue that has a little bit more paint in it, and less wash. It's still a wash, but there's some paint in it, so I'm gonna have to pick up the highlights again after I've done it. And we're on the crew, and they come pre-painted from this 1/700 scale photoetch crew from Edward in the Czech Republic, but they're usually I get a World War I crew because I think the models look good there, but of course they don't have the right colors for the area, so I end up painting in some of the crew just to get some variation, and also of course Royal Marines or French Marines with their blue coats and so on. So just with a fine brush, some speed paint or some normal paint, just painting in, taking your time. And once I cut them off, and you will see that I'll go over with an acrylic marker just to paint over like the hat black or maybe hair brown if the hair is bare and so on, just to get it looking right. So normally, I mean, this part, I guess it's more part of the rigging, but I do it before, so I'm going to have it here in the paint section. And these are the lifts. I do those on the mast before I attach the actual mast on the hull. I find it easier. Also before I do the other rigging or adding in any marines in the fighting tops and so on. So at this stage, when the mast is completely painted, I'll color the wire. Here I'm using this, I think it's 0.05 millimeter brass wire that keeps its shape really well. So I'm using that to get those lifts, and I decided to have the wire more or less like or the rope more or less like an offish yellowish white on this build. I'm varying that as well, different builds, different colors. I guess rope could be a little bit different colors, but I find combining black standing rigging with white running rigging more or less makes for like nice contrast. So I mean, this is not perfection. I'm not really rigging the ship. I'm just attaching wire to a 1/700 scale model, right? This is the glue that I'm using for gluing the crew, and it's like an ultra matte glue. It's made for gluing photo etch. Of course, the drying time is a lot longer. I think it's like, to be completely dry, 24 hours. But it starts keeping the little miniatures in shape pretty early. I mean, it's not like super glue, but so you have a longer working time. But also it is a little bit correctable after the fact, after it's dried, because it doesn't dry completely like super hard. So you can like correct the position of the little crew after the fact using this glue. So that's why I started using that instead of before I used to use the acrylic glue. Also because the acrylic glue dries quite light or shiny, right? Like gloss. So if you get too big a dab, then you're gonna have to like paint over it with some matte varnish or something after the fact. And I just found that it didn't look very good, so that's why I'm doing it like this. And of course, even speeding, I sped it up quite a bit here because sometimes the angle becomes wrong, so you're not really exactly seeing what I'm doing here. But basically what I'm doing is I'm cutting out this little crewman one at a time or a few at a time, and then dipping them in the glue, and then I just attaching them at the points where I have them. And I have the Sophie here just running one side of her guns, so I'm just crewing one side of the guns. It's all a feeling like how much crew you really need. I mean, if for a wargaming model, I would say you need 0 crew, because I never see the crew after when I'm playing. You know, they're kind of hinted at, but you really need to look closely and calmly on it to see it. But it's there, and I know it's there, and for the feeling, it's really nice. Also in the wargaming, especially these hulls that my friend spent so much time making. I just want to do my best. Also, if I'm just going to use it not for diorama but for wargaming, so that's why I'm adding in the crew. If I were to work in a larger scale, I would definitely not, like if I'd go 1/350 scale, which I hope I will be doing soon for some diorama, I'd probably use 3D printed crew, so that has an actual volume, because these are flat, right? But for 1/700 scale, you really don't notice that much. I think the silhouettes are good enough for this. And here you have this AK acrylic markers. I find them really useful when I just want to fill in some stuff, because they don't dry out, and I don't have to like pour paint out. And so their rubber black is my go-to, and also their off-white pens for picking out some of the details, or like covering some of the stuff that I painted over. And again, this step might be a step that you skip over if you're just going to use it as a wargaming model. You might not need this, but it's easy enough. If you get this photoetch crew from Edward in the Czech Republic, all you need is like this glue and a very sharp hobby knife, and then you can just cut them out. They'll fiddle with getting, and a pair of good pincers, of course, and then some patience. It's like manipulating and getting them in the right positions. Then slowly building up the crew on that one side, like manning the guns. And of course we need Aubrey on this. I guess it has a quarterdeck, or I mean, Sophie, a little bit special type of brig, right? So I have Aubrey standing up there, and I have a character who's going to be, of course, Maturin. If they're going to go into action, Maturin will be below decks. So probably I ended up not doing a Maturin on the deck, but he's in there somewhere, right? He's below decks, so just for the feeling. And then adding some of those Marines and sailors to the masts and also to the fighting tops. Usually the Marines were sent to the fighting tops as sharpshooters, right? Many of them before an action. And these I cut them to sections. I use a couple of different brands. Mostly for the lower rat lines, I'm still going Atlantic models, but I'm always trying. I find photoetch from some different brands. I think these are from Starling models, so I'm going to use those. These are not the rat lines. I can't remember what those are called when they go from the fighting top and up. So I use a little bit thinner photoetch for them. I mean, you could make your own from, and I see people do it, but that's not for me. I felt for rat lines and so on, it's much easier going with just the photoetch. A little bit of a photo of the Sophie with crew. And here I have also attached the masts. So we are more or less done with painting. Of course, after I'm done rigging it completely, I always have some small fixes to do. But I usually leave them to them because you mess things up along the way. So you just, after you're done with everything, you just have another full round where you just go in and you correct all the little stuff. And here I'm using actually the ensign is from Warlord Games. It's a red ensign, but I want to make it blue, so I'm going to paint over the red to make it blue. And then just a thin slice of paper for the commissioning pennant. And for the Sophie, it's going to be blue. So both the ensign and the commissioning pennant. So that's the end of section 2. So that was the section where we are doing the painting of the HMS Sophie. And if you haven't watched the first section, you can go back and watch that one, where I talk about a little bit about the prep work and building the masts and the sea base and so on. And in the next section, we are going to be looking at rigging the model. When I rig, I do that completely using brass nowadays. So I'll go walk you through that whole process of rigging the ship in that next section. So I'll see you in the next section, and until then, I wish you fair winds and following seas.